In 2011, we had 3 very happy and healthy children. We had a great life. We were involved in the work of the ministry and in the life of the church. In so many ways, we knew the blessings of God in our lives and in our home. For so many years of seeing God's blessing and God's good hand, we were enjoying life together in the fall of 2011.
We had 3 healthy and happy children, a 9th grade son, a 7th grade daughter, and a 4th grade son. They were involved in sports as well as school activities.
As we saw God's work in our family, in our home, in our church, in the lives of our kids, we thoroughly enjoyed watching our children love the things of God and grow as 2 young men and a young woman who would enjoy the life of the church, went to a Christian school where they were able to experience and to learn great things about God's work. And there was just everything to be happy about in 2011.
It was fun, the ages that they were. Our oldest just starting high school and getting involved with what high school involves. He was having fun, and 7th grade daughter enjoying being in middle school, not being the youngest in middle school anymore, and just having fun with her friends. It was just a joy as a mom to watch them. Our 4th grader, as he had just, at our school they get lockers in 4th grade, and so he had just gotten a locker and was so proud and thought he was growing up, and just the exciting things that they would do at school, at PE. He played football, and he just loved to be with his friends, and all of the kids love him. He's a very likable kid, and so it was just fun as a mom to watch them growing up. Our 4th grader loved baseball. He was playing baseball that fall. He would come home tired and not feeling well, but we just assumed that it was part of him being active.
Harrison came home sick from school a couple of times, and he was real tired, was feeling bad, was lethargic, and he was playing in a baseball game one afternoon that fall, and he just wasn't himself, and even people that were watching knew that something was wrong. A couple of weeks later, 5 days after his birthday, we took him to the doctor expecting that he would just have a virus, and the doctors gave us the awful news that our 10-year-old boy had been diagnosed with cancer. After Harrison was diagnosed with cancer, it was a devastating experience for us. The knowledge that our son not only had this awful disease, but a disease that so often is deadly, was nearly overwhelming. I mean, one of the first questions was, where is God in all of this? Whenever you experience something like that and you ask the question, where's God? You have to go back and remember the things that you've confessed to be true and that you've learned to be true and that you've experienced to be true. And that is that regardless of the circumstances, God still loves you. And it was hard to remember that when you're watching your son undergo chemotherapy treatments and lose all of his hair and lose his friends, their time with his friends, miss out on 4th grade, and go through all of the things that childhood cancer treatment forces on these young children, it was tough to remember that God is nonetheless present in the midst of that struggle.
Yes, and as he had a stroke 2 weeks after he was originally diagnosed. That was hard to watch as he lay in that bed, not knowing what was going to happen. And he had to take a ton of pills every day and could not swallow the pills. And there were so many times that I would question, why? Why him? Why was God doing this to our family?
You know, the Bible tells us that struggles that we have are real, and that suffering is real in this world. But until you start to go through the depth of suffering that oftentimes Christians have to go through, those statements about the reality of suffering in this world sometimes are just academic statements. It's easy for us to say that we'll go through hard times or that we'll go through storms in life, and preachers oftentimes preach on that. But until you're in the midst of a storm, you don't know what a challenge it is to your faith. That even having no doubts whatsoever about the truth of the gospel or the truth of God's love or God's provision of Himself and of His Spirit, the struggle's real whenever suffering is a challenge and a threat to some of the most important things and one of the most important people in your life. There were a lot of times that I said things to God that I would never want to say about God. And the good news is that in the midst of that struggle and suffering, I think God understands the doubts and the questions and the fears that we have. The Bible tells us that we shouldn't have anxieties, that we shouldn't have fears, but until you're one of the most important people in your life, when their life is at risk, you never really know the depth of anxiety and the depth of fear. And to learn that God wanted us to know His presence in the midst of the suffering and the struggle was a great challenge to us. Been in the midst of the storm of watching our child struggle with the physical and the emotional difficulties that relate to childhood cancer was nothing compared to the spiritual difficulties, the questioning. But what we continue to remind ourselves is that God's faithful to us, and He showed His faithfulness in a number of different ways, primarily through His people. Being a Christian is not just being a lone ranger trying to be a spiritual person. It's about being in the community of faith, the church. And God's faithfulness was demonstrated time and time again as the church came alongside us, and they loved our son, and they loved our daughter, and they loved our older son, and they loved us. They gave of themselves, they gave of their time, the emails, the texts, the phone calls. They were so encouraging to us as a demonstration of God's faithfulness. Not to mention that God showed His faithfulness through His own Spirit's presence in our lives, to give us a peace that passes understanding, sometimes in the midst of the most difficult times, to be patient with us when we were doubting, when we were struggling, when we had questions. God was always there to listen, like a loving father, the Bible says. And we found Him to be faithful as that kind of a father. Sometimes we think that the faithfulness of God is found only in removing the suffering or removing the struggle. But 5 years into this, as we watch our son still struggle with his cancer, God's faithful in the struggle, not necessarily outside of the struggle.
I don't know how people go through something like this without being a Christian. We had so many people praying for us and praying for Harrison when times that we couldn't pray. And we're so thankful. When Harrison was in the hospital this past fall, he was so scared. And at night we would be awake together and have a lot of time together. And he would tell me his fears. And I would sing this song with him. When I am afraid, I will trust in you. And that became a song that we would sing together.
The Bible says in Romans 8 that there are times when our suffering overwhelms us to the point that we don't even have words to say. And the Bible promises to us that the Spirit of God intercedes for us. And being reminded of that, remembering that God has not forgotten us. He has not forgotten our little boy. It was not easy. There's nothing easy about it. But the truth is the truth. And God is faithful, even when His faithfulness is in the middle of our greatest challenges.